Right, I think we accidentally got started a minute early, so let's just get into it. Make my text nice and big so everyone can see it all right. And then gotta bring up a terminal. Go into the project that we're working on. Get my start command going. Got my upbeat music playing today. And let's open up our project at localhost 3000 because that is where our Fastify backend is running, serving up this index.html file and providing an API endpoint for us. This is taking a long time to load. There we go. Okay, cool. That seems to be working. And where we left off last time was, let's see, we had done some stuff that I don't want to keep, which is looking at this title attribute as a replacement for properly labeled content. Right. So that now that that's fixed, we've got our form. Where we left off is we are replacing default browser behavior with JavaScript as it applies to forms without being 100% dependent on JavaScript being installed and without losing any of the default browser behavior, which means when I try to submit this form, it shows me my validation errors, except we've enhanced this a bit, although for radios, not yet. But we've enhanced this a bit so that my form, when I hit submit, it not only goes to the first invalid input and tells me the error, but it shows me all of the errors in the form, which is a little bit nicer for me to know what to expect. So I don't fill out the first one, then hit submit, and I see that the second one is invalid. Okay, some other things that we did was we made it so that, man, how do I turn that suggesting things off? Might have to do that in another stream. Let me turn this off really quick and go to my Brave settings. Form. I'm just going to have to come do this another time. All right, let's get back at our stuff. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to play around with more input types and see a little bit broader examples of what someone might be doing with a form. So we've got this field check for radios. That's good. We probably want something for a checkbox and say that this is my input. Type is checkbox, name equals, what is this complaining about? Oh, probably that it needs a label. Checkbox. There you go. Checkbox. We're going to give it an ID of checkbox. And then I think, let's see what this looks like if we set it as required. Okay, another input type that I want to play around with. Let's see what we've got available. If I go to style check, this is a project that I built a while back to just check some styles. It's cool because I try to include as much example things as possible you might run into. So date time, these are going to be text-based style inputs. I don't know how much of a problem I'm going to run into with those. I probably want to put the range range, text area, select, and file. So range, text area, select, and file. You gonna help me out here, GitHub? Not at all. Label for range. Input type is range, name is range, ID is range, min max 10, required, sure. Thank you. Label for select. Come on, come on, come on. Kind of. Sure. Okay, there we go. Those are my options. I need to close that select. Oops. Close that select. I'm just going to say range, select, text area, and file. Oh, so good. Cool. Text area. Text area. Looking good. GitHub Copilot, thank you for the assist. All right. We don't need that anymore. We're looking at our thing. Cool. Looks like we've got everything in there. So this will be an interesting input because I think it was marked as required, but I don't know if a range can actually be invalid. So we'll see what everything else says here. Text area, we're going to do that. That looks like it's working fine. File. I don't want you to open up over there. Thank you. I'll make sure this opens up in a location that I don't have things I don't want to be that are going to be embarrassing. This is a work computer, so nothing inappropriate, nonetheless. You know, secrets and stuff. I got secrets. Screenshots, code, documents, downloads. I don't want to share anything. All right, I'm just going to make a new folder called Safe to Share. And we'll go in there, make a new file called Share Me, Please. Just a text file. Okay, cool. So we're back here. Make sure that does what I want it to. No, it did not. Don't look at pictures of me. No, nothing secret anyway. Let's go with selecting that file. So next time, I think what I'm going to do is just get out of there. Yeah, next time what I'll do is, I don't know what I'm going to do with the files. We'll just deal with it. Okay, so let's see. Let's reload this. And I'm going to put a file into that file uploader. So now that's there. And if I hit submit, we can see that the file is not complaining about a required input. I wonder if there's going to be issues with file inputs. You can actually tell it what type of file extension to use. And I wonder if the validation will, HTML5 validation will tap into that. But we don't need to worry about that right now. Okay, so this is a weird little UX issue that we have here is we have this label for this checkbox. We have this input for the checkbox, and then we're putting our errors right after the input, which I think, I don't think that's what we want. I'm not sure I have a good solution for this. Without adding a lot more logic. Well, let me think about this for a moment. I just realized something that we might have another issue with is, before I tackle that difficult question, let me get an easy one out of the way, which is if we are looking at our inputs. Let's go up to this first one. And we say that this input, I'm going to put like a description down here that says like div how do you call yourself? This is not a good example, but I'm going to say that this thing has an ID of name description. And I'm using this example so that I can come up here and say that this is going to have an aria described by of name description. So one of the things that we did in the previous stream was when we validate our inputs, we basically create this div to hold our errors. And in order to associate these error messages with our input, we're using an aria, an aria described by attribute, which is assigned to that error element ID. And one of the problems with the way that we did it is we have our aria described by, but then when we validate, we are changing our aria described by. And I'm guessing that if we, the description of this input is lost because we've replaced it. What we want to do instead is actually probably check if those descriptions exist. And aria described by attribute can actually have multiple values. So instead of replacing the one that existing, we want to append the one that we will be adding. So let's do that. In our JavaScript, we're going to say that the error ID is this. And then we're going to say that let the descriptors going to equal input dot get attribute aria described by. Okay. And then we'll say that the descriptors equals descriptors. If it exists, then it will be okay. Yeah. So what we're going to do is use split here. For an input that doesn't already have an aria described by attribute, this is going to return null, I think, or this is probably going to return undefined actually, which means when we reassign it here, we check whether it's truthy or falsy. If it's falsy, meaning if it's undefined, or I guess if it's truthy, meaning it is defined, that's going to come back as a string. And we can use the split method on a string to separate by the space character, which means if we only have one value in there without any spaces, we'll end up with an array with a single value. If we have multiple ARIA descriptions or ARIA described by um, identifiers, we'll have an array with the number of identifiers or the identifiers in that array. Hope that makes sense. If we don't have anything, then we'll end up with an empty array. Okay, so next what I want to do is say descriptors. So now it's possible that my error ID may end up like when the page first loads, my error ID is not going to be in there. When I run my validation, I'm going to push my error ID into that array. So the second time that this validation runs, it's probable that my error ID already exists in there, which means I don't want to do it again. So I'm going to actually redefine this one more time. Equals descriptors dot filter ID does not equal errors ID. Great. So now my errors ID should not be in the descriptors. We are not going to do this yet. I think we're going to pull this down and only do that inside of once we know that the input is invalid. Okay, let's see. Loving the music today. Feels like I'm playing Mega Man. Okay. One second. Right. Okay, so basically, I want to push the descriptors onto the input. Basically, we say input dot set attribute. You're right there. Set attribute, please. Set attribute already described by is going to be descriptors dot join with a space. Okay, but we only want to do that if the descriptors actually exist. So if descriptors.length is greater than 0, then we'll do that. And now the last bit of logic that I want to add here is say that at the bottom of this, well, essentially, if the input is invalid, then we can say descriptors dot push my errors ID. So this logic comes at the end because it has to happen after we've pushed this error ID, which only gets pushed if the input is invalid. I could maybe move some of this logic in there even, but let me see if I can refactor some of that. This makes sense here. That makes sense there. The errors ID, I think, might make sense here. Yeah, so I want this errors ID here because I want to be able to remove it if the input is valid. This can be run no matter what. You know what I might do is, I guess what I could do is instead of creating or deleting or creating and removing this DOM node, I could hide and show it, but I think I'm all right with this for now. Okay, errors containers ID equals that. That's fine. That's fine. All right, so let's see if that's working like we want. So now we've got this input with a previously defined aria described by attribute, and if we toggle it and blur it, it looks like our aria described attribute is now working as intended, which is instead of replacing the existing description, which I don't know if you can see that, so let's zoom that in a little bit. Instead of replacing the existing description, we are adding to it, which means if we look at our accessibility chart, the aria description, the description we've got here is how do you call yourself, value is required, which I think is pretty good. The interesting thing here is that the order of the description, the order in which the description is read is based on the order of the described by attributes, not the order in the DOM. So this is one of those things that I think, at the limit of my experience with accessibility, where I would probably want to get someone who uses a screen reader on a regular basis to test this and, describe to me whether this is a good or a bad practice or something like that. Cool. What's next? So we've got our aria described by thing. Okay, it looks like some of our validation is working as expected. The weird thing about this select is it should actually, this is totally unrelated to what I'm working on now, but background should be field, which is right. Okay. Should probably fix this. I spelled that wrong. Yeah, this should be consistent. So this is like a weird dark theme thing that I kind of like this color better. Let's see what that background color is, which is internal that. What other fields are available to me? That's another. Oh, interesting. So the kind of annoying thing about select boxes is that on a normal light mode, regular text inputs are white background and select boxes are gray, and on which makes them two different colors. And on dark mode, regular text boxes are like this dark gray and select boxes are also this dark gray, which makes them the same color, which is good, which is what I would want. But that's not the behavior on light mode. And if I set it to this value field, then it matches on light mode, but then it's different on dark mode. So thank you, user agent. Hard things, difficult things to work on. All right, what was I going to do next? I really don't want to figure out the validation for these fields. Okay, I think the solution here is that when I have radio inputs, there's really two ways that they can be implemented. Field set, which is, I think, the better way because it groups them, and radios are generally grouped together or related. Or no field set. In the event of no field set, where would my validation most appropriately exist? Well, I guess I can say if a field set exists on validation error, I can. If a field set exists, Okay, I have an idea. If an input exists that lives within a field set, we could look for the ancestor field set and put the validation error there. And if an input exists that's invalid and the field set has an error message, I don't know. I'm going to have to play with this. I have to hack around at this, I think. So let's go with this. Let's do this little trick where we can target this input, go to the console, and that's not what I want. Hit 0, $0 gets me whatever the DOM node is that I am currently highlighting. Console dir. There you go. So now on this input, I should be able to get, well, let's see. I'm going to store that and then say input dot. I forget how you query for parents. Hmm. Element ancestors. Ah. Oh yeah, that's jQuery. I really should have this saved somewhere. Ah, that's it. Closest. That's right. So I've got input dot closest field set. Perfect. That's what I wanted. So let's go here and say the errors ID is that. Man, this is going to get tricky because uh, this is going to get tricky because I want to put it on a field set, but I want that description to be for the input, which is fine. Yeah, the description can actually go on all of the input. So if I have, okay, I've got it figured out. If I have all of the inputs in a radio field set group, I don't need to create a new div for, or error container, whatever div for each one of those. I can basically just point them all with their aria described by ID to the same element, which is just somewhere inside of the field set. So that's where I need to determine where to put it. So let's say down here, right? Let's maybe say up here, const element to append errors to, nice and descriptive, equals input dot closest field set or the input. So what this is going to do is it's going to either find the nearest field set parent or it's going to fall back to the input. And then this after is not what I want. Now let's just say set. I'm just going to call it field set. Field set equals that. Okay. If there's a field set, then, whoa. Huh. I don't think I want that. I want to actually like insert after, I think. No, I want to append child is what I want. I want to append the errors container. Otherwise, okay, append. Cool, that works for me. Inner text. Prefer text content over inner text. Sounds good. Okay, so now let's look at this field set dilemma. If I hit submit, now I'm getting it where I want it, but it's adding a new error container for each one. Getting closer. So now it's in the right position. And now what I need to do is, so I kind of want to run this same logic for this input or this field set. So let's move this up, right? If I have a field set, that's the thing I want to use. Otherwise, I want to use the input. If we have a field set, I'm going to say the ID is that. Okay, let's say let let's just say let ID yeah, ID is just going to be some random thing. And then if we have a field set, then ID equals field set ID or the ID. Otherwise, ID equals the input ID or whoa. Okay, so this complained that an if statement can be replaced by a ternary, so it did that for me. And it's just a super complicated ternary now. And we're saying ID equals that, and then ID equals, if there's a field set, then it's the field set ID or the ID, and if neither, no. Yeah, that's not good. Thank you, ESLint, but we're gonna ESLint disable next line. I hate when it does that. Unicorn prefer ternary. Unicorn prefer ternary. Thank you. I still think I don't really like this. field set ID. I'm going to do it this way. So the input has to exist, so that should be fine. Okay, so basically if the field set ID exists, ID will be reassigned to the field set ID. If the input ID exists, ID will be reassigned to the input ID. Which I also no, I don't think we need that. No, we do, because we'll use it down here. I think I'm just gonna simplify this a little bit. Okay. Don't think that can be a ternary anymore. Thank you. And then we want to we still want to set this ID. Oh, this is going to get to some funky logic. I think I'm going to separate that logic and say if field set, then field set ID equals ID, else input ID equals ID. Cannot find name field set. Okay. I think that should do it. That was kind of long and complicated. I hope that some of that made sense. But essentially, I'm looking for this field set, which may or may not have an ID. When I validate, oh, there you go, console error. What happened there? Uncaught field set is not defined. There you go. Field set is now defined. So now if I submit and I look at this field set, which may or may not have an ID, in the case that it doesn't have an ID, I want to give it an ID. And the reason why I want to give it that ID is purely so that I have an ID to work with for these errors. And also so that when I come back and revalidate, I still have that ID to work with. So the error message never changes. And at the same time, my inputs should have an aria described by with the error message. Awesome, it's working. So if I look at this input and check the accessibility tree, it should say that the description is the value is required. And same if I look at this other input, it should say value is required. Sweet. that's working pretty well. Now let's look at the event where we don't have a field set. And OSS2. We should have two sets of inputs now. And the second set is going to say that the value is required for all of them. That actually does make sense because technically these are all they're technically all different inputs even though they share the same name. And I think I could probably do some sort of logic where I find all of the inputs with the same name and only append the error message. I don't know. I don't even know how I would do that in a way that is like would work for a flexible case. In this case, let's just say that it's dependent on the field set being there. Otherwise, you get this sort of weird layout. Looks like, oh, camera's having issues. That's all right. We can go to this one. Still see my pretty face. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'm gonna leave the validation story there because I think that's pretty dang good enough. And let's see what this looks like with JavaScript disabled. Like, what is the story with these to compare with? So first, we see the first one. We fill that out. We hit submit again. We see the second one. We see that it has to be an email. Cool. We hit submit again. We go to the third one. We put in number 3. Oh, it says it has to be a number greater than or equal to 5. So we'll say 34. Submit again. And then we see select one of these options. Okay. Let me bring back that second set. So with a field set, we see that it does select just the first one, which is kind of nice. With numbers, we're going to say 6. Select, right, waiting for that. Please select one of these options. I'll select Windows. We submit again. And here, it's not telling me anything. Please select one of these options. Okay, so that's pretty handy. And this actually is a little bit better than our JavaScript enabled one. So the dilemma here is that when JavaScript is enabled and we do not have a field set, our experience is a little bit worse because now we're appending an error to all of the inputs. So maybe the field set is not actually the way to go. Maybe the field set is, or maybe the solution is to use that name attribute. So here, where are we? Is it possible? So this is where we're looking for all of our inputs. And and if we loop over them, the question is, do we want all of the radios to get that ARIA description pointing to the same error node? Or do we just want the first one to get the error message after it? And then also, is it okay for just the first one to have that ARIA description? I think I would want to add the description, the ARIA described by, to all of them, but then only append the description after the first one. I think that's the ideal solution. That's going to be tough to build, though. Is it, though? Maybe not. Okay, I think I'm going to comment all this out and just kind of move back to where we were, where we said const id equals input.id or math.random. Great, thank you very much. And then down here, instead of this, we're going to say I want to get all the inputs with the same name within the same form. So input dot closest form well, the easy way would be to get all, well, just the first input with the same name. Name equals input name. And then here we might be like re-adding it to the DOM. Basically removing it and adding it to the DOM multiple times for each radio, but that would be fine. Let's say target input equals that. And then we can say target input dot after errors container. Okay, now we need to re-enable JavaScript. Turn that on, hit submit. And now I'm still adding all of these because I'm adding one for each error ID, which is not what I want. So I do want to run this part where I set the ARIA described by. I feel like I'm really close. Oh, this is tough because every input that I'm looping over, all of those radios, they all have different IDs at this point, which means they're all. Okay, I got it. So I think I got it. We basically, I don't think we have to do some of this work. I like the direction I'm going with this. I'm going to get rid of this. If the target input equals the input, console log, same team. Okay, we submit, we hit console, and we see. Cool, they're all looking at the same one. We have. Why is that run 10 times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, a little sanity check here. Oh, because I have 10 inputs, right. OS, OS2. Okay. Right, that's actually expected. If it's the same input, that's fine. If the target is not the same input, that means we're on a radio that has the same name as the one before. The one before has already gone through the validation check, so we can do this. We can say this is getting really convoluted now. I think I'm gonna have to finish this offline and come back and walk through it tomorrow. That's all the time I got for today, so we'll get back on it. This is where it gets really tricky. But once it's solved very good. Cool. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you like it, make sure to like and subscribe. Tell some people, come on the show some other time, bring some questions, bring, bring some projects you're working on that you want to share, and I'll look over it. Okay, we'll finish this up. I think in the last stream, we've got some back end stuff to look at. So hope you come by for that. See ya.